Most people like to think of themselves as good. It feels safe. It feels clean. Being kind becomes a quiet badge you wear, a way to know who you are without having to question it. When life feels uncertain, moral identity offers stability. If you are good, then you must be right. If you are kind, then harm must come from others, never from your choices. But this comfort has a cost. When kindness turns into identity, it stops being flexible. You defend it, protect it, and perform it even when it no longer serves you. You act kindly not because it is wise in that moment, but because not doing so would threaten how you see yourself. The behavior becomes automatic. This is where tension begins. Reality does not reward identities, only outcomes. The world does not adjust itself to preserve your self-image. Yet many people would rather suffer quietly than risk seeing themselves as anything less than good. They accept disadvantage as proof of virtue. Machiavelli understood this trap. He saw that moral identity can feel noble while slowly stripping you of choice. When goodness becomes who you are, it decides how far you are allowed to go. Consistent kindness feels virtuous, but it also creates a pattern. Patterns are comforting to the person expressing them and useful to the person watching them. When your response is always understanding, always forgiving, always accommodating, others stop guessing. They begin to expect. Predictability shifts power without making noise. People adjust their behavior around what they know they can get away with. They push slightly further, ask a little more, delay respect, test limits, not out of malice, but because human beings explore the edges of what is permitted. When nothing pushes back, the edge keeps moving. Good intentions do not protect you here. In fact, they make the situation worse. Because you believe your kindness is seen as goodwill, you miss the moment it becomes a reliable weakness. You explain behavior away. You assume shared values. You wait longer than you should. Machiavelli warned about this without sentiment. He understood that being easy to read makes you easy to manage. When others can predict your reaction, they can plan around it. Your kindness stops being a choice and becomes a schedule. And anything that runs on schedule can be exploited. This reality often remains invisible until consequences arrive quietly, unexpectedly. Machiavelli never argued that kindness was evil. His question was colder and far more dangerous. He asked whether it could survive contact with reality, not in theory, not in ideal communities, but in the real world, where people are inconsistent, self-interested, and responsive to pressure. He observed that leaders, allies, and even friends do not judge you by your intentions. They judge you by what you allow. If mercy is unlimited, it stops being mercy and becomes an expectation. If generosity never withdraws, it loses meaning. What begins as virtue ends as vulnerability. This idea unsettles people because it removes moral comfort. It forces you to ask whether your goodness protects you or exposes you, whether it strengthens your position or slowly erodes it. These are questions most avoid because the answers demand adjustment. Machiavelli did not advocate cruelty. He advocated survival. He believed that a person who cannot withhold kindness when necessary is not moral, but unarmed. In a world shaped by power and consequence, unarmed goodness is not admired. It is consumed. History repeatedly shows this pattern playing out across personal and political life. Without mercy for intentions or fairness, only results and control decide outcomes. Long-term human beings do not experience the world through intentions. They experience it through patterns. What you mean is invisible. What you do repeatedly is not. This is why kindness often fails to land the way people expect. You may feel generous, patient, understanding, but those inner values never leave your mind. Others only see what happens next. Human nature simplifies. It notices behavior, remembers outcomes, and adjusts expectations. If every mistake is forgiven, forgiveness becomes normal. If every request is met with yes, yes stops feeling generous and starts feeling default. Over time, your inner reasons no longer matter. The pattern replaces the intention. This is not cruelty. It is efficiency. People do not wake up deciding to take advantage. They respond to signals, and consistent kindness sends a very clear one. It says there is no immediate cost. It says resistance is unlikely. It says pressure will be absorbed quietly at every level of life. People are constantly measuring each other, usually without words. They notice who hesitates before pushing back, who smiles through discomfort, who explains themselves too much. These observations happen fast and beneath awareness, but they shape behavior all the same. Boundaries are felt before they are spoken. When someone enforces them calmly, others adjust. When someone avoids them, others lean. Pressure flows toward the person least likely to return it. This is not personal, it is structural. Kindness, when unprotected, often places you in the role of absorber. You take the extra work, the emotional weight, the inconvenience. Others feel relief, not obligation. Respect quietly shifts elsewhere, toward those who appear steady under friction. This silent evaluation never announces itself. You only feel its outcome. The late reply, the unreturned favor, the assumption that you will understand. Each moment seems small, but together they rewrite your position. Politeness hides this process well. Kindness looks like a gift, but often it functions like an open door. Once opened, people step through without stopping to admire the doorway. They assume access was intended. Gratitude is brief. Opportunity is lasting. When kindness is predictable, it stops inspiring appreciation and starts creating permission. People do not exploit because they are evil. They exploit because nothing signals that they should stop. Over time, this dynamic hardens. The more you give without resistance, the more invisible your giving becomes. What once felt generous fades into background noise. The relationship adjusts, quietly and permanently, around your availability. Machiavelli understood this distinction clearly. He saw that generosity without limits teaches others how to use you, not how to value you. The danger is subtle. You feel moral, you feel helpful. Meanwhile, your leverage dissolves. Kindness becomes safest when it is chosen, not automatic. When it appears deliberate, it carries weight. When it flows endlessly, it disappears into expectation. What you offer freely loses power the moment it costs nothing to take. This is why the wrong attention gathers around open generosity. It is not admiration, but calculation. People sense where effort can be minimized and where consequences are unlikely. Without intending harm, they adjust their behavior to suit themselves. Kindness, when left undefended, becomes a resource others draw from without thinking, until it runs dry and leaves you wondering when appreciation turned into quiet entitlement. And by then, the pattern impossible to reverse. Every exchange creates balance or imbalance. When one side keeps giving and the other keeps receiving, control quietly shifts. The giver feels generous. The receiver feels comfortable. But comfort is not neutrality. It is advantage. Leverage comes from the ability to say no without fear. When you give repeatedly, that ability weakens. Each concession becomes part of the baseline. What was once extra becomes expected. When you finally hesitate, it feels like a withdrawal, not a boundary. People negotiate unconsciously long before words are spoken. They sense who needs approval, who fears conflict, who will eventually bend. Continual generosity signals flexibility. Flexibility reduces your bargaining position because there is no uncertainty left to manage. Machiavelli viewed power as the control of outcomes, not emotions. From that lens, giving without conditions hands outcomes away. You may feel light, included, needed, but those feelings do not translate into influence. Influence comes from limits. When you are always available, your time loses value. When you always agree, your agreement loses weight. Scarcity creates attention. Absence creates respect. Without these, your presence becomes assumed, not sought. This imbalance rarely feels dramatic. It develops slowly, wrapped in politeness and good intentions. You help more. You compromise sooner. You explain yourself longer. Each small act feels harmless, even virtuous, yet each one tilts the scale. Eventually, the relationship settles into a shape where you give to maintain peace, not because it serves you. At that point, leverage is gone. Any attempt to rebalance feels disruptive, even selfish. The cost of reclaiming control rises the longer you wait. Machiavelli warned, generosity must be measured, or power dissolves quietly over time without resistance. Appreciation feels good, but it is unstable. It rises in moments and fades quickly. Respect is different. It's settled. It shapes behavior when you are not present. Many confuse the two and pay for it over time. Kindness often produces thanks, smiles, warm words. These feel like proof of connection, but they do not anchor loyalty. They disappear the moment circumstances change. Respect remains because it is tied to consequence. When people grow dependent on your generosity, they do not become more loyal. They become more comfortable. Comfort reduces urgency. Urgency is what drives effort, consideration, and restraint. Without it, behavior drifts. Machiavelli observed that dependence weakens bonds rather than strengthening them. When someone relies on you too much, they no longer fear losing you. And without that fear, behavior changes. Standards drop. Boundaries blur. Loyalty is born from strength, not softness. People stay aligned with those who can withdraw support, not those who never will. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. It keeps relationships balanced. Kindness that creates reliance slowly replaces mutual respect with silent expectation. You are valued for what you provide, not who you are. The moment you stop giving, tension appears. That tension reveals the truth of the bond. Machiavelli understood that to be respected, one must be able to stand alone. When others know you will endure their absence, their behavior sharpens. When they sense you will always remain, their effort fades. This is why measured distance protects relationships. It prevents kindness from becoming obligation. It allows appreciation to exist without dependence. Without this balance, generosity corrodes authority and replaces loyalty with routine, leaving you surrounded but not supported. Fear is often misunderstood because it is imagined as brutality. Machiavelli meant something quieter. Fear, in his view, was the knowledge that actions carry consequences. It was predictability. When people know where lines are drawn and what happens when they cross them, behavior stabilizes. Love is inconsistent. It depends on mood, memory, and circumstance. People feel it strongly, then forget it under pressure. Fear, when properly shaped, does not fluctuate. It does not require affection. It requires clarity. This is why it holds systems together when goodwill fades. A leader, a parent, or a figure of authority cannot rely on warmth alone. Warmth invites closeness, but it does not regulate behavior. Without consequence, affection becomes negotiable. People test it, they stretch it. Eventually, they step beyond it. Machiavelli's point was not to inspire dread, but to remove ambiguity. When consequences are known and enforced calmly, chaos decreases. Fear, in this sense, is not emotional terror. It is structural certainty. Uncertainty, more than love, creates order. Without it, relationships drift, expectations blur, and authority dissolves into confusion over time slowly. Forgiveness feels noble, especially when it costs you something. It signals patience, understanding, and emotional maturity. But when forgiveness has no limit, it stops correcting behavior. It starts protecting it. People learn from what is allowed, not what is explained. Each time a violation meets mercy without consequence, the lesson becomes clearer. The boundary was real in words, but flexible in reality. Over time, words lose credibility. Unlimited forgiveness creates a strange inversion. The one extending mercy begins to feel tension, while the one receiving it feels relief. Authority quietly shifts. The forgiver carries the emotional burden. The forgiven carries none. Machiavelli warned that mercy, when unrestrained, invites repetition. Not because people are malicious, but because repetition is efficient. If the cost of crossing a line is always forgiveness, the line becomes symbolic. This erosion is slow and polite. Nothing explodes. Respect simply thins. What remains is a role where you explain yourself repeatedly while others adjust nothing. In trying to appear humane, you weaken the very structure that made your kindness meaningful. Eventually, forgiveness loses its moral weight and becomes permission without resistance remaining. Distance is often mistaken for coldness. In reality, it is what keeps relationships stable under pressure. Emotional warmth feels good, but it pulls people closer than structure can support. Distance preserves shape. Machiavelli favored controlled space because it prevents emotion from overriding judgment. When you are too emotionally available, every decision becomes personal. Every boundary feels like betrayal. Detachment removes this distortion. Strategic distance allows consistency. You respond the same way whether you feel appreciated or not. This steadiness signals strength. Others adapt to it quickly because it does not fluctuate with mood or approval. Warmth invites testing. Distance invites caution. Neither requires hostility. Distance simply says there are limits that do not change. Within those limits, interaction can remain calm and respectful. This form of detachment is not withdrawal. It is presence without entanglement. You remain engaged, but not reactive. You observe before responding. Over time, this creates psychological safety, not through closeness, but through reliability. Machiavelli believed people relax when they know what to expect. Strategic distance gives that certainty, preventing kindness from spilling into weakness while keeping authority intact over time consistently. When you allow behavior to repeat, you teach others what is acceptable, not through speeches or confrontations, but through silence and continuation. Every time you excuse disrespect, ignore inconvenience, or soften your own needs, a lesson is delivered without words. The lesson is simple. This is how I can be treated. At first, it feels generous. You tell yourself you are being patient, understanding, mature. But authority does not come from intention. It comes from enforcement. When enforcement never appears disappears. Authority fades quietly. People respond to consistency. If boundaries move, they stop believing in them. They adjust their behavior to the version of you that shows up most often, not the one you describe. Over time, your identity in their eyes becomes fixed. This is how leniency turns into positioning. You become the flexible one, the reasonable one, the one who will adapt. These labels sound positive, but they carry hidden costs. Flexibility invites pressure. Reasonableness invites negotiation. Adaptation invites expectation. Machiavelli understood that authority is taught, not declared. When you fail to correct small violations, you signal tolerance for larger ones later. Each moment you stay silent reinforces a role you may not want, until reclaiming respect feels disruptive. Over-accommodating does not just affect how others treat you, it changes how you see yourself. Each time you override your instincts to keep the peace, you create a small fracture inside. You feel it as tension, then fatigue, then quiet resentment you struggle to explain. You begin to notice that giving no longer feels generous. It feels compulsory. What once came from choice now comes from fear of conflict, fear of being seen as difficult, fear of losing connection. These fears drain energy quickly. Resentment grows, not because others ask too much, but because you agreed when you should not have. The anger turns inward. You question your judgment. You doubt your boundaries. You stop trusting your own reaction. Machiavelli understood that inner disorder weakens outer strength. A person divided against themselves cannot project authority. When self-respect erodes, posture changes, tone softens, presence shrinks. Others feel this shift, even if they cannot name it. The cost of accommodation is exhaustion and loss of confidence to protect yourself when it matters most in critical moments alone. Machiavelli valued strength that does not depend on display. He admired inner solidity, the kind that holds under pressure without announcement. This strength comes from alignment between decision and action. You do what you decide, even when it is uncomfortable. Inner solidity removes the need to prove anything. You are not reacting to approval or rejection. You are responding to reality as it is. This creates calm. Calm creates authority. When your actions match your limits, self-respect stabilizes. You no longer bargain with yourself after the fact. You do not replay moments wishing you had spoken differently. Consistency replaces regret. This is not dominance over others. It is governance over yourself. Machiavelli understood that the strongest position begins internally. A person who can withstand discomfort can enforce boundaries without anger. From this place, kindness becomes clean. It is given without self-betrayal. It can be withdrawn without guilt. It no longer erodes respect because it rests on firmness. Inner solidity keeps you steady, and others respond with caution because your position no longer shifts under pressure. Societies talk about values, but they move according to results. Systems are built to reward what works, not what feels right. Promotions follow performance, not intentions. Influence follows effectiveness, not effort. Over time, outcomes rewrite moral stories. Institutions cannot afford sensitivity. They need reliability. They need predictability. When pressure arrives, sentiment is trimmed away and only function remains. This is not cruelty. It is design. Systems that hesitate collapse. Kindness may be admired, but it is rarely protected. When kindness interferes with efficiency, it is sidelined. When it slows decisions, it is reinterpreted as weakness. Groups remember who delivers, not who cares. Machiavelli observed this long before modern organizations existed. He saw that collective structures reward those who secure stability. Virtue is praised publicly, but power is granted privately to those who produce order. This creates a quiet mismatch. Individuals are taught to be gentle, while systems demand firmness. Those who mistake praise for protection are often shocked when circumstances change. Applause does not translate into security. Results create permission. They justify authority after the fact. Once outcomes are achieved, methods are forgiven. When outcomes fail, intentions are forgotten. This pattern repeats across politics, business, and personal hierarchies. Understanding this does not require cynicism. It requires clarity. The world does not organize itself around moral narratives. It organizes around what sustains itself. Those who ignore this reality remain vulnerable, not because they are wrong, but because they are unprepared. Kindness survives inside systems only when paired with leverage, timing, and restraint. Otherwise, it is consumed by processes that cannot pause for feelings, explanations, or fairness. Once momentum replaces choice under sustained pressure and public scrutiny, idealism worsens works best when nothing is at stake. It thrives in calm spaces where consequences are distant and time feels generous. Pressure changes the rules. When resources shrink or threats appear, behavior hardens. Kindness without strength depends on cooperation. It assumes others will meet goodwill with restraint. Under pressure, that assumption fails. People protect themselves first. They simplify decisions. They choose speed over sensitivity. Machiavelli observed that crises reveal nature. When fear enters, ideals are tested. Those without leverage lose their voice. Appeals to fairness sound thin when survival is questioned. Power listens to outcomes, not arguments. This is why gentle strategies collapse when stakes rise. They require mutual commitment to values that pressure dissolves. The moment one side defects, the kind actor absorbs the loss. History repeats this pattern relentlessly. Agreements break when enforcement is absent. Promises fade when advantage shifts. Those who cannot apply pressure must accept it. Strength does not require aggression. It requires capacity. The capacity to resist, to deny, to endure discomfort without yielding. Without this, kindness becomes a liability that others adapt around. Machiavelli did not dismiss ideals. He subordinated them. He believed values must survive reality, not hide from it. If a principle fails under stress, it is decoration, not guidance. When stakes rise, the world does not ask what you believe. It asks what you can sustain. Those who rely only on goodwill are overwhelmed by those who prepare for friction. Kindness paired with strength remains stable. Kindness without it collapses quietly. This is not tragedy. It is physics applied to human behavior under pressure. Preparation determines survival when ideal intentions encounter resistance and scarcity simultaneously externally. Kindness has power only when it arrives deliberately. When it appears everywhere, it blends into the background. Intention feels important to the giver, but timing is what others remember. A kind act offered at the right moment can reshape perception. The same act offered constantly becomes invisible. Strategic kindness waits. It observes the situation before acting. It understands that impact comes from contrast. When support is not guaranteed, it carries weight. When understanding is not automatic, it feels earned. This is not manipulation. It is awareness of human attention. People value what interrupts expectation. A well-timed concession feels generous because it is not assumed. It creates surprise, relief, and recalibration. It signals choice rather than obligation. Machiavelli understood that restraint amplifies effect. He saw generosity as most powerful when it could have been withheld. Timing transforms kindness from habit into message. When you act kindly only when it serves the moment, you preserve its force. Others notice because they cannot predict it. That uncertainty commands attention. This precision protects you. You are not drained by constant giving. Your kindness stays effective, guided by judgment alone. Respect grows in spaces where access is limited. When something is always available, it loses gravity. Withholding, when done calmly, introduces weight into interaction. It reminds others that presence is a choice, not a guarantee. Scarcity sharpens attention. When your agreement is not automatic, it becomes meaningful. When your help is not assumed, it is appreciated. This is why restraint often commands more respect than generosity. Machiavelli saw that authority emerges from uncertainty. People adjust their behavior when they are unsure of outcomes. If support might be withdrawn, effort increases. Boundaries become real. Withholding is not punishment, it is calibration. It forces balance back into the exchange. Others contribute more because they must. When you do less, selectively, your actions matter more. Each yes carries intention. Each no defines position. This calm refusal protects your standing. You are not chasing approval. You are setting terms. Over time, others respond with caution and respect, not because you demand it, but because access to you is no longer free or predictable. Scarcity quietly teaches value without conflict and resets dynamics without emotional drama or explanation attached afterwards. Kindness driven by ego seeks recognition. It wants to be seen as generous, understanding, indispensable. This form of giving is reactive. It responds to discomfort, guilt, or fear of rejection. It looks selfless, but it is not strategic. Strategic kindness serves position, not image. It is quiet. It does not announce itself or demand appreciation. It appears when it strengthens alignment and disappears when it weakens it. Machiavelli distrusted displays of virtue for this reason. They expose need. When kindness is used to feel good about oneself, others feel it. They sense the hunger beneath the gesture. gesture. People-pleasing erodes authority because it broadcasts dependence. Strategy does the opposite. It removes emotional urgency from action. When kindness is chosen from strength, it feels clean. There is no need for validation. No resentment follows. This form of kindness can be firm, brief, even distant, yet it is respected because it comes from control. By separating ego from action, you preserve leverage. Kindness becomes a tool you wield, not a reflex that governs you. This distinction defines mature power without emotional noise. Perception guides the world more than truth ever could. People rarely see your intentions. They see your actions, and even more so, the way those actions appear. A kind gesture, repeated publicly, becomes a statement. Its meaning is determined not by your heart, but by the audience that observes it. Machiavelli understood this instinctively. He saw that morality, in practice, is less about purity and more about appearance. A leader or individual might act with integrity privately, but if others perceive hesitation, weakness, or inconsistency, the internal virtue is irrelevant. Influence depends on the impression you leave, not the quiet truth of your character. This is why reputation often outlasts conduct. What people believe about you shapes their decisions. They adapt to signals, not hidden intention. Actions become markers in a social ledger, quickly categorized as trustworthy, reliable, or exploitable. Reality bends around perception, and perception is always filtered through expectation. In social games, appearances carry weight because they are measurable, immediate, and manipulable. Inner virtue cannot be counted, observed, or predicted, yet the world reacts to the visible, constant. Machiavelli noted that cultivating the right image is strategic. It creates leverage and establishes boundaries without confrontation. Kindness, when displayed as virtue, can be weaponized by others or by circumstance. A public display signals consistency, predictability, and approachability. These traits attract attention from those who notice patterns. They may expect repetition, test limits, or adjust behavior to benefit themselves. The generous act becomes a template for interaction rather than a free choice. Moral signaling can also lock you in. Once a pattern of visible kindness is established, deviation draws scrutiny. If you attempt restraint after a string of generosity, observers interpret it as change, betrayal, or caprice. Your freedom to act strategically diminishes because your public persona dictates expectation. People respond to perceived identity more than context. The label of kind, forgiving, or principled becomes a constraint. Each action thereafter is measured against the standard you have established. This standard is invisible to you in its full force, but shapes every interaction. You may find your options narrowing without noticing how it happened. This trap grows silently. Kindness meant to express character instead becomes a social contract. Others anticipate it, rely on it, and sometimes manipulate it. The very trait you hoped would empower you can instead erode flexibility, limiting choices in future situations. Moral displays turn into soft chains. Machiavelli would argue that awareness of this dynamic is essential. Strategy requires understanding not only what you intend, but also how it will be read. In a world driven by perception, ignorance of public interpretation is costly. Even the strongest internal virtue can be sidelined by the assumptions of others. The lesson is subtle. You are not asked to abandon kindness or integrity. You are asked to recognize that visibility transforms acts into signals. Signals are interpreted, leveraged, and occasionally exploited. Control over perception, therefore, becomes as important as control over action. Kindness that appears effortless, yet deliberate, retains value. Kindness that is constantly visible without discretion becomes predictable and, eventually, limiting. Machiavelli's insight reveals that in social dynamics, virtue itself is a resource, one that can empower, constrain, or be mined by those who observe it carefully. Every public gesture carries weight, and weight always demands strategy. Composure is often underestimated. Calmness is mistaken for passivity, but in reality, emotional neutrality is a form of power. When your responses are measured, when you do not overreact to provocation or flattery, you control the tempo of interaction. Others test boundaries instinctively, but neutrality removes the fuel for their tests. Your mind becomes steady, your presence reliable, and unpredictability shifts to your advantage. People notice who remains unshaken, who can observe without judgment, who responds without emotion clouding decision. This quiet command carries weight that force alone cannot create. Boundaries do not need anger to be effective. Clear limits, communicated calmly, calmly, establish expectations without creating resentment. People respond to firmness more than to persuasion, because firmness signals consequence before it is tested. By asserting what is acceptable and what is not in a controlled manner, you prevent conflict from arising. You do not need to justify, argue, or beg for respect. You simply maintain consistency. This approach reduces drama, preserves energy, and signals authority subtly yet undeniably. Those around you adjust automatically to the shape you set. Affection is powerful, but it is fragile when unsupported by respect. Priority must go first to earning consideration, attention, and acknowledgement of boundaries. When respect comes first, affection becomes a choice rather than a demand. People are drawn toward those who command steadiness and fairness, not just warmth. Machiavelli observed that influence follows authority, not sentiment. Those who prioritize respect establish a foundation that makes connection sustainable. Affection flows naturally when interactions occur under clear, controlled terms. It is not forced, manipulated, or assumed. By putting respect above affection, you secure position before emotion, ensuring relationships are guided by recognition of strength and consistency rather than fleeting goodwill. This recalibration of social priority allows interaction to remain stable, predictable, and aligned with long-term influence, rather than vulnerable to exploitation or misunderstanding. Kindness that endures is never accidental. It flows from strength, not need. When you are secure in your boundaries, your choices, and your presence, generosity becomes deliberate, meaningful, and respected. It is given freely, yet without compromise to your position. Weakness demands approval. Power chooses timing. When kindness is exercised from authority, it carries weight, influence, and clarity. It does not invite exploitation because it is framed by control. In this way, generosity survives reality, is neither naive nor reactive. It is strategic, deliberate, and calm, a reflection of strength rather than a concession to sentiment.